By the late 1920s, Henry Ford wasn't just a man, he was an American deity. He had put the world on wheels. He revolutionized manufacturing with the moving assembly line. He was one of the wealthiest human beings to ever walk the face of the earth. When you have that much money, that much power, and that much unprecedented success, a strange psychological shift happens. You stop believing in the word impossible. You start looking at the laws of nature, the complexities of foreign cultures, and the vast, untamed wilderness of the world, and you think, I can fix that. I can manage that. But Henry Ford was about to learn a very hard, very expensive lesson. He was about to discover that while you can build a machine to conquer the road, you cannot build a machine to conquer the jungle. Welcome back to the Audacity of Him. Today, we're looking at the time an American billionaire decided to build a slice of Midwestern suburbia in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and how it became one of the most spectacular, hilarious, and disastrous failures in corporate history. This is the story of Fordlândia. To understand the sheer audacity of this project, we have to look at the one thing Henry Ford couldn't control: rubber. In the 1920s, a car wasn't just made of steel and glass. It required tires, hoses, valves, and gaskets. Every single automobile rolling off the Detroit assembly lines needed a specific, massive amount of rubber. And at this time, there was no synthetic rubber. You had to get it from a tree, specifically Heba brasiliensis, the para rubber tree. Here was Ford's problem. A European cartel led by the British and the Dutch held a suffocating monopoly on the global rubber supply. They had smuggled rubber seeds out of Brazil decades earlier, planted them in highly organized, disease-free plantations in Southeast Asia, and cornered the market. In 1922, the British instituted the Stevenson Plan, deliberately restricting the export of rubber to artificially jack up the price. Now, Henry Ford hated monopolies. He despised the idea that his mighty American empire was beholden to a cartel of British bureaucrats halfway across the world. He wanted vertical integration. He already owned the iron mines for his steel, the forest for his wood, and the glassworks for his windshields. He decided he was going to grow his own rubber. But Ford didn't just want a plantation, he wanted to make a point. He wanted to return to the birthplace of the rubber tree, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, and prove that the American way, the Ford way, was superior to European colonialism. In 1927, Ford negotiated a massive concession from the Brazilian state of Pará. In exchange for a 9% share of the profits, Brazil gave Ford a staggering 2.5 million acres of land on the banks of the Tapajós River, a major tributary of the Amazon. To put that in perspective, Henry Ford was just handed a piece of the rainforest roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. He had the land. He had the money. Now, all he had to do was tame the most biodiversive, hostile jungle on the planet. What could possibly go wrong? In the summer of 1928, Ford's expedition arrived. It was an armada of logistical arrogance. The main ship, the Lake Ormoc, was loaded with everything Ford thought he needed to build America in the jungle. Tractors, stump pullers, earth-moving equipment, an ice-making machine, and prefabricated buildings. But from the moment the Americans stepped off the boats, the Amazon fought back. The managers Ford sent down to run this operation were not botanists. They weren't agronomists. They weren't even tropical explorers. They were Ford manufacturing men from Michigan. They knew how to optimize a factory floor, but they knew absolutely nothing about the jungle. When they tried to clear the land using heavy Midwestern tractors, the machines simply sank into the deep, soft Amazonian mud and rusted in the oppressive humidity. The dense canopy, laced with thick vines and massive hardwood trees, laughed at their efforts. Eventually, the Americans had to hire local indigenous and Brazilian laborers to clear the land the old-fashioned way, with machetes, axes, and fire. And then came the diseases. The site Ford had chosen was a paradise for pathogens. Malaria and yellow fever swept through the camps. Venomous snakes, jaguars, and clouds of biting insects made every day a fight for survival. The first few managers Ford sent down literally fled back to the United States after suffering nervous breakdowns or contracting severe tropical illnesses. But Henry Ford, back in Dearborn, Michigan, who, by the way, would never actually visit this site himself, refused to accept defeat. He poured more money into the operation. He demanded that the jungle be leveled, and slowly, painfully, out of the mud and the malaria, a town began to rise. This is where the story shifts from a tragic struggle against nature into an outright comedy of hubris. Henry Ford didn't just want to extract rubber. He was an intense social engineer. He believed that the lifestyle of the Midwestern American worker was the pinnacle of human civilization, and he intended to force-feed this lifestyle to the Brazilian workforce. He believed he was civilizing them. He named the town Fordlândia. If you were dropped into Fordlândia in 1930, you would think you were in a suburb of Detroit. Ford built paved roads, concrete sidewalks, and street lamps. He built a state-of-the-art hospital that was arguably the best medical facility in all of South America at the time. He built a golf course, a library, a cinema, and schools. He also built houses for the local workers. But instead of designing homes suited for the tropics, homes raised on stilts with open ventilation to catch the breeze, Ford insisted on building traditional American-style clapboard houses with metal roofs. Imagine living on the equator where the temperature is 100 degrees Fahrenheit with 95% humidity, and you are forced to live in a house with a tin roof and closed-in walls. It wasn't a home, it was a slow cooker, and the workers roasted inside them. But the architecture was nothing compared to the rules. Henry Ford imposed his strict, puritanical lifestyle on the entire town. First, the work schedule. In the Amazon, locals traditionally worked in the early morning and the late evening to avoid the brutal, lethal heat of the midday sun. Ford's managers said, absolutely not. In Detroit, we work 9 to 5. And so the Brazilian workers were forced to toil in the fields during the hottest, most dangerous hours of the day, governed by factory time clocks that they had to punch in and out of. Second, the diet. Ford was obsessed with healthy eating and was a massive proponent of the soybean. He banned the local diet of beans, fish, and farina. Instead, the company cafeterias forced the Brazilian workers to eat what Ford considered healthy American food: oatmeal, canned peaches, whole wheat bread, and unseasoned brown rice. Third, the morality. Ford banned alcohol completely. He banned tobacco. He banned women from the workers' dormitories. And, in perhaps the most surreal detail of all, he mandated mandatory weekend recreation. Instead of spending their weekends resting or enjoying their own culture, the workers were strongly encouraged to attend poetry readings, sing English sea shanties, and participate in Henry Ford's favorite pastime, American square dancing. Yeah, that's right. In the middle of the Amazon rainforest, Under the threat of malaria and jaguars, men were being forced to do-si-do to fiddle music. You can only push people so far before they push back. And Henry Ford was pushing the Brazilian workers to the brink of insanity. The workers, however, found ways to rebel. Just outside the jurisdiction of Fordlândia, down the river, a sprawling shanty town sprang up. It was built by opportunistic merchants and was filled with everything Ford had banned: bars, rum, gambling dens, and brothels. The workers called it the Island of Innocence, a deeply ironic name for a place where they went to escape the oppressive morality of their American bosses. But the real breaking point came from the cafeteria. It happened on December 20th, 1930. It is known in history as the Pans Rebellion, or the Cafeteria Riot. The workers had endured months of grueling work in the midday sun. They had endured the tin-roofed ovens they were forced to sleep in. But the final straw was the food. On this particular day, the cafeteria line was altered, and the workers were informed that from now on, the cost of their daily oatmeal and canned peaches would be deducted directly from their paychecks before they even saw the money. A worker named Manuel Jesus pushed his tray away in disgust. An argument broke out with a manager, and then the entire cafeteria exploded. Years of pent-up frustration erupted into an all-out riot. The workers smashed the cafeteria. They tore down the factory time clocks, the ultimate symbol of Ford's mechanized oppression, and smashed them into pieces in the town square. They overturned trucks. They cut the telegraph wires so the Americans couldn't call for help. The American managers were terrified. The men who had come to civilize the jungle were now fleeing for their lives. They sprinted to the river docks, piled into boats, and actually rowed out into the middle of the Tapajós River, hiding there through the night as they watched their pristine Midwestern utopia being ransacked. It took the intervention of the Brazilian military, who flew down in planes and marched into the town to finally restore the order and save the American management team. Ford fired the rioters, brought in new management, relaxed the rules a bit, and tried to push forward. But the riot was just a symptom of the larger disease. Fordlândia wasn't just a cultural failure, it was an ecological impossibility. Remember why the British planted rubber in Southeast Asia? Because they were planting it far away from its natural predators. In the Amazon, the rubber tree naturally grows wildly dispersed, maybe 1 or 2 trees per acre. This is nature's defense mechanism. But Henry Ford's managers, using their Detroit assembly line logic, planted the trees exactly the way they aligned machines in a factory. Incredibly dense rows packed as closely together as possible to maximize efficiency. They essentially created the world's largest all-you-can-eat buffet for the natural enemies of the rubber tree. First came the caterpillars, millions of them, stripping the saplings bare. But the real killer was a microscopic fungus called Microcyclus oleae, the South American leaf blight. In the wild, if a tree gets the blight, the surrounding jungle acts as a barrier, protecting the next tree miles away. But in Ford's densely packed, perfect little rows, the blight spread like a wildfire. Whole hillsides of carefully planted trees turned black, withered, and died. The leaves fell off. The rubber stopped flowing. Ford brought in top botanists to graft blight-resistant leaves onto high-yield trunks, engaging in desperate Frankenstein botany to save the project. They even moved operations to a new site called Belterra, which had slightly better terrain. But it was too late. Nature had won. By the end of World War II, the world had changed. The demand for natural rubber plummeted with the invention and mass production of synthetic petroleum-based rubber. Henry Ford's health was failing, and he passed control of the company to his grandson, Henry Ford II. The younger Ford looked at the ledgers. He saw a project that had cost the company nearly $20 million, over $300 million in today's money, and had barely produced enough rubber to make a single set of tires. In 1945, Henry Ford II cut the company's losses. He sold the entire 2.5 million acres back to the Brazilian government for a measly $250,000. Henry Ford, the man who changed the world, died in 1947, never having set foot in the jungle utopia that bore his name. Today, Fordlândia is a ghost town. It still exists deep in the Amazon. A few thousand locals live among the ruins. The massive water tower still stands, rusting in the humid air, a towering monument to one man's staggering ego. It is the ultimate proof that you can buy the land, you can buy the tools, and you can buy the labor, but you cannot buy the compliance of Mother Nature. Thanks for watching The Audacity of Him. If you enjoyed watching a billionaire lose a fight to a fungus, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. What's the most audacious business failure you've ever heard of? Before we go, it's time to rank Henry Ford's jungle misadventure on the Audacity scale.